Yo, just to check. Did Travis teach y'all Flexbox on Monday? Oh, thank God. Okay. I had this like moment. I'm just like, oh no. Cool. We'll start up in just a minute. Finishing something up here. Oh, great. Cool. Hey Calgary. Just let me know if the audio is working. I haven't plugged in my screen yet, but let me know if the audio and at least if I'm showing up. And we'll get straight in just a minute. Awesome. Okay. Sam says you can't hear me. The screen should be up in a second for you. Cool. So do let me know if stuff cool and you can hear me. Sweet. So Calgary is going to join us for a little while. If somebody could keep an eye on the Slack, I do have Slack open here. But if somebody could keep an eye on it, just to let me know if stuff pops up. Cool. Do I have a volunteer? Nice. All right. So we got a volunteer. What's up? Hey. How you doing? Yet another day. It's yet another day of boot camp. See those bright, shining faces. Wow, I can barely even. Wow. Today we're going to be taking a look at something that's a little bit different. You've been working on the Tweeter project. I think the Tweeter project is a lot of fun. And one of the nice things about the Tweeter project is, unlike the Tiny App project, it doesn't look like garbage. No, like unlike the Tiny App project, you get to put a little bit of styling in there, right? And styling is fun. So you learned about CSS earlier this week. In a lecture, you had Intro to CSS. You learned all kinds of things. And then you've been working with CSS throughout the Tweeter project. And today we're going to look at some of the next level things that you can do with CSS. I won't cover everything you can do with CSS because CSS is pretty big, but I'll cover some fairly big topics that'll give you a bit of a kick into what we're going to call responsive design. Right? That's what we're going to take a look at today. So let's have a little bit of a review. I'm just interested in hearing, number one, how do you like jQuery? Did you know that it's pronounced that way? A lot of people say jQuery, but it's jQuery. Or for the cultured programmer, it's McQuery. It's jQuery. Please don't say jQuery in an interview, but or do. It would be really funny for me. the person you're interviewing with is like, oh no, another student of NEMA, another poor graduate. So how do you like jQuery? How are you enjoying that? Yeah, yeah. All right. So we got one thumb up. Cool. Got one thumb. I heard a pretty good. Cool. Pretty good. These are rave reviews. Yeah. Any other comments? What's that? At least it's not CSS. It's not CSS. That's a great review. Yeah. Is anyone having a particularly tough time with it? Yeah. All right. There we go. Some honesty. Thank you very much. There. One hand up. All right. One hand up for difficulty. And there you go. So I do want you to, like, as a group, remember to take some time to reflect on the tools that you're using. I think it's very easy to just get sucked into the work and not take the time to just step back and go, okay, why do I hate this? Like, I hate it, but why? Or the opposite, like, why do I like it, right? Maybe I'm maybe I'm enjoying this tool a lot. Why is that, right? And you're going to find that through that reflection, it'll open you up a little bit more into understanding, sure, like, about yourself or whatever, but also, like, understanding the tools a little bit more, and being able to identify, like, other tools that might be helpful for you or other tools that might not. It's not that jQuery is a bad tool, and it's not that it's a good tool, right? It's that it works in a particular way, right? And for some people, that particular way or that particular mindset makes sense, right? Some people look at jQuery and it's immediately intuitive. Some people look at it and they go, what? What? What is it? Dollar? What? Some people feel like that. What, dot on? Ugh, I hate it, right? Some people don't like that. And that's okay. Because you might find that when you move over to something like React in the future, right? React is not necessarily going to be easier or more difficult than jQuery. It's not necessarily going to be better or worse, right? But for some people, it might come more intuitively, right? If it doesn't immediately make sense to you, it's also not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're broken and you're never going to get it. It just might mean that you might need a little bit of a change in perspective, right? So I think this is a really good place that, towards the end of week 4, you've got some good JavaScript under your belt. You got some CSS, you've done some backend, you've done some front end. It might be a good time to sit and stew a little bit, maybe even call over a mentor, right? And you don't always need to just call mentors over when you're having trouble, right? Like, you can call mentors over just to have a conversation and ask them for their opinion on stuff, right? I think that's honestly one of those, the most valuable uses of of you using a mentor in bootcamp, is just ask for opinions, right? Ask for opinions and don't take the opinions of one mentor as gospel, right? Shop around, and over time you'll form your own opinions, and over time you'll also find that the way you view different things as a programmer is going to change. I wanted to bring that up just because it's not written in the curriculum. No one tells you to do that explicitly, except for me right now. Just sit, stew a little bit, and budget for that time. Because specifically, I think that one of the ways to really understand how to use these tools is to take a look at the way that they're designed, take a look at the way that they exist and the way that people use them, but also why do they exist? What problem do they solve? And for whom, right? For whom? A lot of the information about how to use a tool can come out of for who that thing was designed. So as an example, you're going to learn SQL next week, right? SQL, I think, is trash. I hate it. SQL is fine, but SQL doesn't fit my mindset. Right? It doesn't fit the way that I view the problem-solving world. That doesn't mean I'm broken. I'm broken in other ways, but that's not the reason I'm broken. SQL is interesting because SQL is a language that's going to work with databases. Right? SQL is a language that doesn't have for loops. Right? You go, what? Everything I know is for loops. No, right? Maybe it doesn't have for loops. But as you dive into learning SQL, one of the things that you're going to learn is SQL was designed for business people, right? Smelly, non-coding business people, right? SQL is designed not for programmers, but it is designed for people who just need to be able to query for some statistics real quick and be able to use that stuff real quick. So it was designed in a language that was supposed to be easy to understand. Doesn't actually work out that way, but that's where it came from. I bring that up because you're working with CSS. Yet another language that, in this case, doesn't have for loops. It doesn't have for loops. It was designed for not super programming people. CSS is not a language that has things like functions. It's not a language that has it didn't originally have variables, right? It doesn't have a lot of expression in it. All it's really good for is to declare some rules about style, right? To declare some rules about style. Now, we've been writing CSS. I encourage you to take a look at the CSS that you've written so far and the CSS that you see on sites and tutorials and whatever, and start looking at it as how would someone declare a style? How would someone say that this thing should be blue and that thing should be red and this should have a font color of yada, yada, yada? One way to do that is to just have statements, right? Just to be able to say, okay, P tags are red and EM tags are green, right? H1 tags have a font size of 25 pixels. Right? That's one thing that I can say. So I could just declare a bunch of statements. And over time, if I declare a bunch of statements, I might find that those statements are sort of related to each other. So if I say P tags have 25 pixels in font size, P tags have the color red, and P tags have a green background, and I just keep saying P tags and P tags and P tags, it might be good for me to just bundle that stuff up. Right? So if we have a bunch of statements, statements are related or about the same thing, we can bunch them. Right? And you've seen that be done with stuff like, if I do this, I can go, a P tag has, and then I use my little curly braces, and I'm able to say the color red, and the background, purple. We bunch stuff up. One of the other natural things that I might want to start doing is to be able to define conditions. Sometimes this P tag should be green. Some other times this P tag should be blue. Right? A language, to be really useful, it should have some kind of flexibility to be able to make decisions. Right? It just allows us to write more expressive stuff. Now I might stop and ask myself, is this necessarily a thing that my website needs to do? Right? Is it, and I could just stop and think, is it very common for a P tag to change, or for me to want it to change from the color green to the color red? Is that a common thing that I want to do? Is it very common for me to want to change a font size from 15 pixels to 25 pixels? Is that a common thing that I want to do? If it's not a very common thing to do or a desire, then there's no real reason to find a way to embed that into the language, right? And just go like, whatever, I don't care. Right? For example, CSS does not have the ability to control self-driving cars, because it's not a thing that you need to do very often with CSS. But it is very common for me when I'm on a web page to say I'm on youtube.com. It is fairly common for me to want elements of my page to change depending on what's happening. And for example, it's not uncommon for me to want like this thing. I'm not going to click on it because I don't want to get banned again. I don't want, it's common for me to want this thing to appear when I hover over it. Right? And that's a pretty common thing for for me to want a web page to do. So they found a way to give CSS that language, right? So specifically, the way they decided to do that in CSS is you go, oh, okay, well, when you hover over this thing, right? There's also oh, what about when you click on something? right? And designers and developers said, well, it's very common for us to want a visual thing to change when you click on something. So they went, OK, well, active, right? And these are pseudo selectors. Right? So these things you've already kind of played with. I think you've already done a hover for sure, and I think like an active and all that in Tweeter. But there's also other situations where we might want some stuff to change. For example, when I resize my screen, whoa, incredible! What happened to the side? You know, like it changes a little bit. And I don't necessarily want to have to load a different page depending on the size of the screen. Like I don't want it. Let's imagine a situation where when somebody asks for youtube.com, the server says, OK, well, what size is your screen? And you say, I am this size. And the server goes, OK, I will send you this page. You could have different pages for different screens that get sent back. But it's also very common for a user to just change the size of their page. Right? And I don't necessarily want to make a request for that and then change it. Right? It's also such a common thing that I don't want to necessarily write JavaScript to do it. Right? The reason I might not want to write JavaScript to do it is because that feels like a lot of extra work. For me to, in every project I have, write a bunch of code that watches the size of the page. And if the size of the page changes, then I go ahead and I change a bunch of CSS classes or something like that. You've been working with jQuery. You realize that sometimes jQuery is fun to write. Sometimes it's really not. and I like to minimize the amount of code that I write. So the people over at the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, peeps over here, just the nerds who decide everything. They said, fine, we will include some sort of if statement condition inside of CSS. So that's what we're going to start working with today. Is we're going to start off with essentially how do you do if statements in CSS? And these are called media queries. Because the nerds who make CSS, they said, fine, you want if statements to check for the size of a screen, to have different things happen depending on the size of the screen? Fine, we'll give you that. But you know what? These if statements will only work with the size of the screen. Right? They won't work with anything else. You can't do any funky, if the user is logged in or yada yada. Right? This is just what is the size of your screen. If it is this size, then you'll have this CSS. If it is this other size, then we'll have this other CSS. Right? That's what we're going to be dealing with. So how many of you have dealt with media queries before? It's perfect. Oh, one person. Get out of here. No, cool. Just wanted to make sure that I'm going to go at a certain pace. If you want me to speed up, tell me. Don't tell me. I'll just continue going at the same pace. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by Googling what a media query is. Now, media queries are, as I've said, if statements for CSS that are very, very much specific just to the size of your screen. Right? If the width of my screen is this, then include this CSS. Right? If it's this other thing, include this other CSS. There is a specific way to write this. At media, only screen, and max width. I don't know what that means. Right? There's a pretty... Where'd you go? There are several, this isn't the right page. There are several different kind of syntaxes for media queries. What I tend to do is I will Google it, and I will copy and paste it in, and I'll fudge around with the numbers. We're going to see that some of them are going to work the way you expect them to, and some of them might not. We'll just take this example here. I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to start off by making myself a page to work with. Index.html. You want to see me code real fast? Oh, wait. Oh, I can't. Oh, man. I used to have the abbreviation that I could, and it would just make the whole page for me, but I think I've turned that. Oh, wait. Nice. There we go. So I've got this HTML page. What I'm going to do, just to be clever, is I'm going to erase everything in here. because we'll actually explore what the things in there kind of mean. We're just going to start off with just a whole H1 that says, "Hey, what up?" And then maybe a P tag. Do you want to retire at 23? Do you want to make $90,000 from the comfort of your own home? Well, I just needed some text. If you are interested in retiring at 23 and making $90,000 from the comfort of your own home, just come talk to me. I've got a lot of makeup you can sell. I don't actually. I'm not in a multi-level marketing scheme, but it'd be pretty funny if I was. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up this page. So let's copy my path, open it up, and here's the thing. I'm going to toss in some CSS. There's a couple different ways I can toss in CSS. You've seen this. One way is to actually have a CSS file. The way that I am going to do it, though, is I'm just generally going to go style and just do it in line here, right, for now. Right. As our thing gets more complicated, I'll move it into its own file. So where'd you go? Where'd you go? There you go. Here's what I'm dealing with right now. No, stop. We'll erase the comments because we'll explore what this stuff does without the help of comments. Cool. So I have a bunch of CSS written up right now. I'm going to delete some of it. Right now, I have a body that gives me a background color. Nice. Background color tan. Tan's pretty boring. Anybody got a favorite HTML5 color? Is chocolate? Whoa, chocolate's a color. All right. So my body, background color, chocolate. Let's see what this does. Surprise, surprise. Whoa, the body is chocolate. Now I would like to be able to write some if statements. Here is an if statement. This says here, media screen and max width 992 pixels. Then body background color blue. What do you think this does? Just look at it. What do you think it does? If the screen width is less than 992 pixels, then we apply this style, which says the body background color is blue. And maybe we can try this out. Go ahead, right? Nothing's happening at the moment. I don't know how wide my screen is. So I'm going to go inspect. Right? And when you inspect, it puts up, as you like drag this stuff around, you start seeing little numberinos, right? And at a certain width, my computer freezes. But there's a certain place where it's just blue all the time. And then it's not. So okay, well we'll go here, and then at a certain point it turns blue. So one thing that you might notice is that it says the maximum width of it is supposed to be 992 pixels. Cool. I'm just getting Slack messages, so let me see who that is. Oh, that's just someone else. So, that's something that we might notice is that like the width here at the moment is 1863, 1820, and it's at 1730. That kind of changes. Not really at the 992 pixels. Maybe there's different kind of pixels, right? So there's screen pixels, and then there's CSS pixels, and those are slightly different. I will leave it as an exercise to the student, to the reader, to kind of explore. No, okay. Your CSS pixels. Here's difference between screen and CSS pixels, right? And here's a little picture. Let's see. There you go. Difference between CSS pixels and screen pixels or display pixels. There's a little picture somewhere here. No, there isn't. There's a nice little diagram that shows you basically a, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. Difference between a device pixel and a CSS pixel. So a device pixel has maybe this standard like 2 by 2 kind of situation, right? And it might be 2 actual pixels on the screen, right? Like if I say, oh, in CSS pixels, 2 pixels, it might relate to that. But depending on the density of like the resolution of your screen, right? Maybe you're on a retina, like you got money, right? You get more pixels. So the count is going to be slightly different. And in this case here, it's multiplied by 4 in total for area, but it's like multiplied by 2 in width and in height. And, now, we'll explore that a little bit more as we go forward, but I just kind of wanted to go like, haha, isn't that cute? Oh my god. You kind of have to like think of it more. So the reason I say that I always Google this stuff is because when you go to something like W3 Schools, often you just straight up look up for like common media queries, right? Common media queries or common breakpoints. And we'll just pick a couple. Here's one for when we're apparently on a portrait, right? Or landscape mode for a phone. Well, the minimum device width is going to be somewhere between 320, right? Or a maximum of 480 pixels, right? Just kind of ballpark. Right? Smartphones, a minimum of 321 pixels. Right? And I'll generally just take these common ones, right? And use those. Right? The thing is, there's too many devices. Like, there's too many devices for you to like actually come up with like, oh, this is what it is. Because watch, Apple's gonna come out next week. We have a new phone. We added 3 extra pixels to the side. No, now I can't. Now my media queries all break. That's fine. So we deal with these like sort of large swaths, right? And we're gonna leave the job of coming up with like nice UI to the designers. Right? The designers will say, okay, our users are usually on these kinds of devices. We're going to come up with designs that look fine on these ones, right? And will generally look good within these kind of situations. And they'll give us, as developers, breakpoints. Okay? A breakpoint meaning what is the place where I switch from one style to another, right? From one style to another. And I want you to see that you can write anything you want in here. Like in this case here, I wrote background color blue. Right? But I could write a whole bunch of other stuff. Here's let's say the p tag display none. Right? But when your max width is up to 992, then the p tag display is it show some hidden? I don't remember. Huh? Display block? Yeah, we'll do that. Oh, wait, it's like hidden visibility. That's what it is. Visibility none and visibility show. Yeah. So visibility hidden and visibility show. There we go. Right. So here's, oh, I wonder what the secret is. Oh, man. No. Huh? It's visible? It's not show, eh? Visible. Man, I hate CSS. Yeah. So here we go. Oh, I wonder what the secret message is. What? Do you want to retire at 23? Do you want to make $90,000? Like, hey, hun. Like that whole thing. So I want you to start thinking now that like with this new addition, right, we can add breakpoints. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean about our applications, right? It gives us a simple way to change around styles depending on. That's right, Kaid. Yeah, that's right. Depending on the medium that we're currently on. We could test this out. We could go inspect. Oh, whoops. Inspect. And I could ask myself, if I was to go into a, oops. Gonna make this kind of visible. So you can click on this button here when you're in the inspector to view your thing as if you were on a phone or on another device. I'm like, this is what it looks like on a computer. This is what it looks like on the iPhone X. I'll just pretend I could afford one. Haha. Here's the iPhone X. Wow, so nice. Let's just fit to window here. Cool. Not super visible. Not super visible. It's the media queries are firing. In fact, it's blue instead of chocolate, and I'm seeing that the text is actually showing up, but it's not big enough. I can't see it. So one of the things that you're going to run into when you try to make things work for mobile is this exact issue where like text won't rescale. And this is a place where I stop and I say, listen, like I should not need to specify that like the font size should change when the screen is smaller. Like that's just dumb. Please don't make me do this. I don't like programming. No, like that's where I get angry. And it turns out that really the only thing that we kind of need to add here is a single line to our head. This is a meta tag. It says viewport on it. Heads up, this is another one of those tags that I always forget how to write because there's no reason for you to memorize this stuff. There's just generally no reason. Instead, one of the ways that I usually do this is I'll make myself a new file. I'll go HTML in just a new like .html file. Right? And generally, VS Code is going to pop that up for me. And it's this tag right here, the meta name viewport content width device width initial scale 1. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm just going to go ahead for the moment, copy it, paste it over into the other side, the one where I deleted all the the head tags. I'm going to find that when I save this and I refresh it, whoa, hey yo, what up? The font at least changed a little bit, right? And it's making itself a little bit more legible. I can imagine that if I was on a phone, like a phone is usually going to be maybe about physically this size. Like I can actually sort of read it. Right? And if I wanted to go beyond this and make the font like absurdly large or like whatever, then I can write CSS for that in a media query. Right? But as long as I have this line here, the meta viewport tag, then it'll try to scale some stuff. I want to unpack exactly what this means. In a sense, we can go the meta viewport tag. So I will be honest, put in a little bit of editorial into this, as if I never do that. I think this is stupid. I think it's dumb, because you're going to find that the meta viewport tag does pretty much exactly what you would assume the browser should do without an extra tag to do it. The viewport is the area of the window in which web content can be seen. That's the viewport. So often it's not exactly the same size as the actual page. So say that this thing here is the viewport. It's possible that the page itself actually extends beyond, right? Beyond this way or beyond downwards. And in that case, the browser may or may not have some scroll bars or might give you the ability to scroll back and forth up and down. Right? That's an extra thing. The browser's like, hey, here. Treat yourself. Like you can see the rest of the page. Now, this situation here, for phones, the viewport is usually like the pages are usually wider than the viewport, or they're wider than the screen. So the browser needs to do like the extra work of just kind of like squishing it, and then maybe it gets a little bit longer or whatever. And what we have to do is with the viewport meta tag, we have to just straight up tell it, oh. The width of the page, it shouldn't be like just some random number. Like the width of the page should be the width of your phone. Heads up, just so you know, like as if I didn't know I needed to tell you that, but the width is going to be the device width. And the initial scale that you should start kind of showing the page at is 1, meaning the normal scale. Like assume this person's looking at their phone in front of their, I don't know why I have to tell you this. Like that's what this tag says. Because for some reason the browser doesn't assume this. This kind of touches in on that idea of a pixel is not a pixel as well. Trying to deal with like the difference between screen pixels and CSS pixels. And now, actually, I hadn't thought about this, but it might even be the case that, I don't know, I was thinking like maybe that fixes this, but it doesn't really. So the reason I'm not going too deep into this is because my personal belief is that as a front-end developer, you actually don't need to know this stuff that much, right? To get started, right? To get started to hack some things together, and especially for Tweeter. You don't need to know the difference between like CSS pixel and screen pixel. You don't need to know all the different media queries that are good for different devices. You just kind of just go and copy the ones that you used. Also because, again, depending on where you're working, like your designer is going to give you different kinds of breakpoints. What I do want us to start looking at, though, is actually changing the layout of a page depending on the size of the screen. So specifically, I'm going to lay out an idea where I want to, similarly to how we call it YouTube did it, which I think I might still have you open, similar to how YouTube changes, for example, how many videos are being displayed. So here I've got 6 in a line, and when I go here, now it's showing me 5. When I get even further down, it might show me 4, and then eventually it goes down to 3, but it'll have like collapsed the sidebar. All right, I want to take a look at strategies that we can approach or use to approach this kind of problem. So what I'm going to start off with, I'm going to start off with personally designing the main bit using a specific thing that's called Flexbox. You haven't seen Flexbox very much. You're going to see it now. It's going to be cool. And I will constantly be going back and forth between the big thing and the small screen and the big thing and the small screen, right, to ensure that what I'm building actually kind of makes sense and looks nice. Now, I'll go ahead and I'll just straight up make a different file for this or a different folder. We will call this one responsive demo. That's responsive demo with flex. Just nice long titles. And what I'm going to put in here is just like an index HTML. I'll also put in a style.css so I don't write all this stuff in line. So the way that my index HTML is going to look like is, at the moment, it will have just the head with the meta, link, rel, style sheet, and then is it source? Probably source. Source style.css. Right. I just want to ensure that my style.css is actually being included. I feel like I haven't done this right. Like I feel like I have to do this, but we'll find out. Right. And what I'm going to do is just over here go something like h1 should have the color green. Right. Essentially the hello world of a CSS thing, and we're going to try that on this page. So evidently I'm not actually including the CSS properly. Let's go back to non-responsive elements to the right. Cool. Yeah, because I've written the thing in here. I'm pointing to the right thing, but the way I've written this link rel is wrong. So /, maybe, maybe. The way this person did it was link rel style sheet. Notice one of the things that I wrote was source style CSS. Let's get this backwards. It's href, right? Source is going to be for images. Href is for tags and links and all that. They've also written it, in this case here, as a not even closing tag. Isn't that weird, right? HTML is this like very forgiving language. Just go like, you just do it. It's fine. We'll figure it out. Right? And there we go. I'm green now. Right? So I've got something hooked up properly. I'm going to come up with an example for like what I want this thing to look like. I want to, maybe we'll do this on, I'll draw it up so that you can see. I want to draw a page that looks like this. So can I do squares, shapes? Just looking for a. No, I guess there's no shapes. I'm just going to freehand this. I want to do this kind of situation. One big old banner, whoop, and then one big old footer, whoop, And then what I want in the middle is just 3 nice things. 1 and 2 and then 3, and that's nice. This is what I want my thing to look like when you're on a desktop. When you make the screen a little bit smaller, it should resize itself so that each one of those 3 elements is displayed on top of each other. So this is my header, and this is like item A, B. I did that usual mistake of, I don't know if you've ever made a banner. You're like, it's the John Mulaney joke. Big H, little p. So that's what I want this thing to kind of end up looking like. So I'm going to use something called Flexbox. When I look at this right now, without even thinking about the CSS, I just started thinking about like the HTML. I have a couple different options for how I might start putting this together. Let me say that each one of these is going to be a div. So this is a div, this here is a div, and then these 3 are each divs. How many boxes do I see on the screen right now? If I'm just looking at just this, like how many boxes do I see? So we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, and then where's the? Yeah, 5th. Yeah, 5. Yes. What if I said you were wrong? This is the Star Trek. I don't know. There are 4 lights or whatever. No, there. What if I told you there were 6 boxes? 6 boxes. Where's the 6th box? Where is it? It's right here. Boop. The thing right there. We could visualize that as a box. It makes sense to me to think of this like having some kind of container around it. I'd even say there's 7 boxes. There's one big box around here, right? I could do that. Right? But there's, in my opinion, a minimum of 6 boxes. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then whoop, 6. So we're going to start coding it up that way. You can go in here, and I'm going to say, instead of this being that whole Ayo, what up, I'm going to make 1 div, and that's for my header. And I might even write the word header in there. I might make another div, and this one contains a bunch of other divs. So div A, and then there were div B and C. B, C. And then I'm also going to make a div for my footer. Right? That's what this looks like right now. And I could look at what gets rendered. Wow! Amazing! Just so pretty. So pretty. We're getting there. I'm going to throw a bunch of CSS in here. I'll give this one like a class for header. I'll give this one a class for container. And then I'll give this one here a class for footer. Right? Just so that I can style this a little bit. And I'll say that my header is going to have a background of Rebecca purple. Right? And my container, all of the divs inside of the container, they're going to have a background of, anybody got a favorite HTML color? Of, what's that? Chartreuse. They're going to have a chartreuse. And then my footer, that one's going to have a background of, and let's just discover a new one. P. Pale golden rod. Yes, pale golden rod. And then I will just also say that every div is going to have a, we'll say a margin of 15 pixels, just to keep things a little separated. And then a border radius of like 8 pixels, because I think border radiuses are cute. Fight me. There we go. Look at that. So nice. So pretty. So pretty. This is a nice little burger, a little sandwich. But I want to make a weird sandwich. I don't want the sandwich just like stacked. I want to make a sandwich where everything's just next to each other. I want to take a bite, and it's got to just be like one bite of Gouda, and then another bite of pastrami, one bite of mustard, right? Like this. That's it. Just sideways. You got to find a way to turn these. Somebody earlier said the word block, like display block. Did anyone say that? Is it you? You. You said display block. That's totally a thing that we could kind of throw in. Display block, I'm not going to do anything just yet, but there is an inline block. Incredible, right? We can tell all of the divs inside of the container to be displayed as inline block elements. So right now they're next to each other, and I could assume that maybe when we get really close, oh, it even just works on its own. Like, wow, when I squish. But maybe I want them to go like one above each other, not when I get really close, but when I get like here, right? And I can start playing around with a media query that does that. Right? As soon as I'm happy with this, I can go and say, hey, let's steal that work from before. Haha. Yes, there we go. We steal it. We put it down at the bottom. And we say, when the media screen and the max width is 892, just random, just numbers. We fuzz them, we see what works. Then I'm going to make the display for, where'd you go here? For the container div. And I actually have to take this whole thing. And I say, this is the stuff that I'm going to add. Container div is going to have everything from above, and also is going to display inline block. Right? And now I've been able to have like an if statement that when I hit a certain point, no, please. When I hit a certain point, it's supposed to end up doing that particular thing. And I could maybe explore why this isn't happening that way. Oh, there we go. It's because I was zoomed out quite a bit. This is actually what my page looks like. So when I'd zoomed in, I'd broken the layout. But we can see that as I get closer, there you go. As I get closer, I don't need to go all the way for it to start kind of getting in line. It makes a hop. Okay. Now, inline block is not necessarily the thing that I want to deal with right now. I had said originally that my goal is to have them sideways except for when I get close. So I'm kind of doing the opposite at the moment. And so what I want to do is ignore this inline block situation and introduce you very lightly, early, to Flexbox. And then what we're going to do in the second half is we're going to dive a bit more into Flexbox and also bring in something called SAS. So Flexbox does two things. Flexbox, you get to have parents, and the parents get to tell their children how to behave. So the parents might say, hey, children, y'all should be in a column. Or hey, children, y'all should be in a row. That's really about it. And you can add some extra stuff to it, but that's the basics of it. The parents tell the children what to do. So I look here, and I ask myself, who are the children in this case that I want to tell to display either in a row or in a column? ABC, like those are the children. So I'm going to go to their parent, and I'm going to say, hey, parent, you should get your children in line. Like you should tell your children to stand in a column or stand in a row, depending on what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to come back to this media query in a second, but I'm going to write this stuff right now for the container. I'm going to tell the container, hey, you should be flexy, right? You should flex. And the thing that you should particularly flex is you should tell your children to be displayed in a row. And so I tell the parent that the parent should be in the mindset of flex and to display their children in a row with flex direction row. And now what I'm going to find is, again, I've removed that media query stuff. Like I'm not doing that right now. The only piece of thing that says like some kind of layout or whatever is display flex and flex direction row on the container. What I'm going to find when I go this is all my stuff is in a row, which is nice. All of them in a row. To make this like a little bit nicer for myself, I'm just going to make each one of these divs have like a particular width, like 400 pixels or something. We'll just so we can see them a little bit more. Right, so they're next to each other, and I can, if I want, tell the container, yo, no, you should show your children as a column. And now when I refresh this, they're in a column. Do I want to get real funky with it? There's also row.reverse, right? Row reverse, and now they get rendered backwards, CBA. Wild. What? They're just A, B, C has been reversed in a row. You think there's a column reverse? You damn heckin' right. Here's a column reverse. You can do that as well. Right? So generally, I'll look at a page and I'll ask myself, when I draw boxes around these things, do these things seem as if they're displayed in a row or in a column, right? And if they are, then that might be a place where I go to the parent and I tell it to use flex. Right? And you're gonna find that pretty much any of these like styling things that you need to do become pretty easy to do with flex. I take myself back to YouTube again and ask myself, here, if I was to make this thing over here with flex, I have a big parent, right? And I might initially, if I was to ignore these lines over here, right, and the words like subscription, if I just look at the entries, then I can tell myself these are all items, right? Maybe they're all divs or whatever, and they're being displayed in a column, right, where the parent has flex. But then I also look at this and I see that there's these divisions. So technically, this isn't as simple as having many little rectangles, but rather having one box here, another box. And I can think of each one of those boxes as being displayed in a column. And then inside of those, I can write some code to display the stuff for them inside of a column. When you start thinking about all the wacky kind of ways that you could play around with this. Here's another one. These things here, they're displayed in, are they displayed in a row or a column? As a grid? Maybe, right? It might be displayed as a grid. Like I might say, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of the reasons this list looks like a grid to us, and like it totally could be a grid, is that each one of these things has the same width, right? It has the same width. But what if they didn't? What if some of these were wider than others? And I could actually go around and play with this in my HTML. Let's say that I had 1 million of these, and some of them were, I'm going to say big. Right? Some of them are going to be small, and some of them are going to be like medium. Right? And let's say I just had a ton of these. And when I say big, small, and medium, what I mean is make sure that when I say big, small, and medium, what I mean is that the, no, there you go. What I mean is that like their width is going to be a particular size. So let me just make a couple of these. The style is going to be for my container div. If I have a div with the ID big, then maybe that will have a width of, we'll do 400 pixels. And then for small and medium, they'll be different. So medium is going to be 250 pixels, and small is going to be a width of teeny little 150 pixels. So small, so small. We might even give them different colors or whatever. So big is going to be chartreuse. And just so that we can really see the difference here, this is going to be red, and this is going to be pale violet red. And the small. I'm going to start seeing when I run this is I have a bunch of these right now. I have a bunch of them. I had left in my container that they should be in column reverse, but let me go row. Right. This is what it's doing right now for row. Right. Not very happy about it. But I might tell myself, hey, you know what? If I have however many hundreds of elements, right, instead of squishing them all on one row, maybe I'm happy with them just kind of wrapping around down on the bottom. And flex wrap. And now I'm saying, OK, you tell your children to be in a row. And if they need to wrap onto the next row, let them wrap. Right? Whoa, right? And now we've got it wrapping. I think that's pretty cool. And depending on how much space I need, they just wrap themselves. I think this is pretty whack, because this is now starting to look like something that we could build a pretty neat kind of interface for, right? This kind of even starts looking like a timetable situation, Gantt charts or whatever. All kinds of cool stuff. Get them in line, nice and clean. Does anyone here like need order? Is anyone here just like driven by order and clean lines? Yeah, cool. Let me just ruin your day a little bit. So Flex. What I'm really trying to show you here, I know I haven't coded a lot this lecture, right? And that's not the point of this lecture. Some people might take the CSS stuff and just go like wild and do all kinds of things. What I really want to show you is that it can take like a single line of code to really be able to do what you're trying to do. Okay? Often what I find is when people are hopping into CSS, they get overwhelmed and they just get very eager to like add a ton of stuff in. Right? But I approach CSS with a much more like minimalist kind of point of view. Less is more. Right? So take some time to understand what these things are for, and you'll be able to like use them in a very powerful way. Right? Is that fine with everyone? Cool. Now, I think. I don't know. Let's see. I think I'll finish this on that last note, the thing that we were actually trying to do, which was when I hit a particular breakpoint, I want to see them all in a column. Right? So maybe when I hit like this breakpoint here, I want to see them all in a column as opposed to a row. Now that's as easy as taking this thing, the selector for .container, putting it into the proper media query, which I usually just keep at the bottom of the page, right? And saying, OK, in this particular situation, my container should have all of the styles from up above, like all of the styles that it used to, but also it should show stuff in a column. And now what I'm going to find is when I start off, I'm like this, but when I hit a particular place, whoop, like, where are you at? Where are you at? Maybe not. Oh, that was underwhelming, wasn't it? Well, let's see. When you're running into these issues, like it's fine. You can just go ahead and say, okay, well, I'm just going to change the flex direction in the actual one and not the media query, and let's see if like that seems to be working fine. Right? And then maybe I'll make sure that my media query isn't currently doing anything, and I could just keep going. Right. Row, column, and then just row again. And then I scream and I say, but why? Why can't you just be normal? And then like we'll try this again and just go column and Sometimes if I get particularly frustrated, what I might do is throw in a background of like just something that is not ignorable, like green. And I could see like, it looks like my media query is actually not firing until I'm just really small. Right? So I might just need to adjust my media query a bit. So instead of being 892, just set it back up to 992. I wonder why that's the deal. Yeah, so now I'll just have to fudge around with the query until I get to the place that I wanted it to be. There you go. And so we'll just kind of have to mess around with the media query a little bit until we get to that particular place. And generally, I would take myself into, again, the responsive mode and test this out. One of the things that's really nice about responsive mode is that when you hear you have these options up here across the top. Like, what's it look like on mobile? What's it look like on medium mobile? On a large mobile device? On a laptop? On a large laptop? Right? And I would personally, for maybe if you really want to get some values from somewhere for your media queries, I would use the values that you find over here, like 320, 375, whatever number this is, 1440. Like those are what you can use if you want. Cool? Okay. Are we cool to take a break here? Nice. Is this just like, whew, so cool? I find that CSS has a lot fewer like bells and whistles. But again, if you just kind of slow down, write very little bits of code, you should kind of get there. Cool. Let's take a break until treat yourself. 14 minutes. How does that feel? 14 minutes? Yeah. You too. At 11:17, we'll pick back up. Cool? What's up? Welcome back. So, Calgary, if you could just let me know when the audio is working. I'm plugging in my screen right now, so in a second it'll go boop, and you'll see stuff on there. So do let me know when the audio and the video are working. And then, I mean, looks like it's working for Calgary. What's up, Nolan? What's up? Sam, good. All right. And it's cool because this is probably the first time that this works for satellite. Does not work for Vancouver at the moment. So let me just test this out. Oh, you know why? Because it's off. The TV turned itself off. So it turned itself off as I plugged in, which is kind of funny. 3, 2, 1. Sewing. There we go. All right, welcome back. Cool. So what we did in the first half was we explored a little bit behind like the motivation for CSS like media queries, a little bit about how to like actually use them. We talked about Flexbox. Right? There's other parts to responsive design. For example, one of the things that like we'll take a quick look at is percentages. We can describe dimensions in a couple different ways. So if you remember, like, for example, I was going like this big div is going to be 400 pixels or whatever. Right? Yeah, this big div is going to be 400 pixels. But something that I could also say is maybe the big div is going to be 50%. And the percentage is something that like gets people confused sometimes. So we're going to look at this in isolation in a second. I'm going to pick the header. We're going to do some sizing with the header, and I want you to see what the difference between using percentages and pixels is going to be. So for my header right now, I'm going to say it's going to have a width of 500 pixels. We'll just start at that, and we'll just see what that does. So when I go over to my header over here, my header is now 500 pixels. Okay, that's 500. It's cool, 500 pixels. I could even go ahead and just change that 1,000 pixels. Pixels are free. Use them up. There's 1,000 pixels. Wow. Right. Now, coming up with like the proper pixel number is not the easiest thing, and in fact, you've kind of seen me struggle with that a little bit. And part of that is because pixels suck. They're a terrible way of measuring things, right? Instead, one other way of measuring things is by percentage. So let me do 100%. The header's width is going to be 100%, and we'll see what that means in a sec. 100%. A width of 100% means it takes up as much width as it's given, right? If it has all the space, it's going to take all the space. Like, oh, yo, nice space, dude. Like, I'm going to take all the space, and it just kind of stretches out. I could say that the width of this should be 50% as much as it's given. So only 50%. I do 50%, and it only takes up 50% of the space that it's afforded. Now, something that I find kind of curious, and I'll be honest, this kind of caught me off guard a second ago. Like literally a second ago when I did this, was I thought that I would say like take up 100% of the space, and it would go from like one end out to the other. I was not expecting it to bleed off the side like that. Right? In fact, we notice, if we really zoom in, we notice that this line here is a little bit longer than this line here. Right? I'm actually kind of curious about why that might be the case. I don't know off the top of my head. One thing that I'm going to try, you may have explored this on Monday, is border sizing, or border box sizing. Box sizing? Have you seen that before? No? Cool. I'm going to try this. It's either going to work or not work. If it works, I'll explain. If it doesn't work, you'll pretend like I never did this in the first place. It didn't work, so let's just ignore it. No, okay. Let me try one more thing. Nope, not worth it. This is not a thing that's worth kind of watching me struggle over for the moment. I might make a note of it for myself. It's probably not a huge CSS thing, but I'll figure it out and then I'll let you know. What I do want us to focus on at the moment, though, is when we say a percentage, that means that that value, like in this case the width, is going to be a function of the width of the parent. And so this here says I want to take up 100% of the width that my parent gives me. If I did 50, then that's 50% of the width that my parent gives me. And the reason I want to point that out is because let's say that I'm looking at one of these divs, and I say this div is supposed to have a width of, let's say 50%. 50%. It's a big div. It takes up 50% of the space. What I see over here is that the green divs take up 50% of the space that their parent gives them. Right? Now, I am going to make this like clear, I'm going to go to the parent of that big div, which is the container. I'm going to give that parent a particular width. For example, 500 pixels. Right? 500 pixels. And we're going to find now that, oh, whoops, not background. I'm going to give this a width of 500 pixels. And I'm going to give it a background like light blue, just so, oh, light coral, just so that we can see it. So my container, instead of spreading across the whole page, is only going to take up 500 pixels, which is pretty small. I want us to see now that the green dude, who had been told to take up 50% of the space, 50% of the space, this is 50% of 500. It's not 50% of the page, it's 50% of the parent. Right? And that's kind of important to see because, like, say that my parent gets smaller. Like if I went and I said my parent is 75%, so my container is 75% of its parent. Well, my container's parent is the body. So if the body changes, now the container is going to change. And if the container changes, now the big div is going to change. Right? But my medium and my small divs, those are using pixels, so those are not going to change width. So I can go ahead and set this back up here. I'm going to find that as I change this, notice that the green ones are actually changing size. Right? The green buddies are changing size. The red and the kind of corally, or what is that, like violet ones, they're not changing size. And so I can choose with a combination of percentages and pixels, I can choose which things I want to keep fixed and which things I want to be responsive very immediately. And notice there's a difference now between responsiveness that is due to, responsiveness that is due to breakpoints, such as that turning into columns and the background turning green. That was a breakpoint that I set, versus this kind of more fluid responsiveness. Right? It's fluid. It's nice and like it just kind of responds to very small changes. Right? So something that you might want to look into, if this interests you. This isn't necessarily something that you have to read into, but if front end is something that you like, you might want to look into what fluid design is. Right? Maybe not fluid. Fluid responsive design. There we go. And, fluid layouts are about proportionally changing. So as the screen changes, like if I design my stuff with percentages, then I'm able to, let's say, more immediately respond to changes, such as my greens over there, right? And such as this big corally bit. Right? So I wanted to put that on your map, is that percentages is something you can play around with. Percentages aren't going to solve every problem you have, right? But there's something to be kind of aware of. And then the last one, the last thing that I might mention, let me see. Okay, I'm going to literally say the word EM. I'm going to say M, just so that it's in your head. I am not, like I'm just not going to show you, am I? No, I'm not going to show you like an actual example of this, other than to say that an M is a unit. So in the same way that I can say, let's put some text in here. I'll do some text in my. I guess I lied. I guess I am showing you an example. The word header here, and among the ways that I can decide how big that word should be, if I go ahead and I say font size, I could pick something like 50 pixels. Like that is a thing that I can say, and that's 50 pixels. I can also pick 50 M's. And an M is just so much bigger. An M is how big is the letter M going to be on this page. At least that's the way I've been taught, right? It's a how big is this in relative to an M. So I'm going to put this as a link in the notes. I don't necessarily personally want you to play around with this too much. Yeah. M is going to be relative to the font size of the current element. Right? So if my element has a font size of 10 pixels, right? Just it happens to have a font size of 10 pixels, and then I tell it to display font at 2em, right? That's going to be 20 pixels. Right? So generally, if we're using M's, we might have a standard font size up at the top of the page, right? Like at the root, the HTML is going to have this font size, and then all the other places where I use units, I'm going to say relative to that main unit. So for example, I might say my HTML page is going to be it's going to have 15 pixels for font. And so I might say my H1 is 2 EMs, so that it's twice as big as the usual font. And I might say that like the fine text that nobody's supposed to be able to read, that one's going to be 0.5 EMs. So it's half of the usual font. Does that make sense as an idea? And we can think about EMs that way. Like how big is it relative to the usual font of my page? Are there questions about that? I know that's not like the best answer to that question, but yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, no, EMs are pretty common, right? I don't see any reason for not playing around with it. If you want to use EMs, what my recommendation is set a standard kind of font size. For like your HTML page has this font size, and then for your components, or for like your little bits, you choose the font size relative to what the usual thing is. I think the nice thing about that is like, if I for some reason wanted to change the global font size, and I wanted everything to kind of reflect that, I don't need to go everywhere and change that, right? I don't need to go from 16 to 18 in one place, and then 25 to 32 in another place. I can just change that value in one place, and everywhere else is just like relative to it. Right? So that's something that you can do. Although to note here, EM is relative to the font size of that element. So if I use an EM in a p tag, it's going to be relative to the font size of the p tag. Right? But REM is relative to the font size of the root element. Right? So you might want to use REMs instead of EMs, right? If you want to play around with that. There's other ones though. VH relative to 1% of the width of the viewport. Right? Sort of similar to the percentage, right? Similar to the percentage, but instead this is going to be viewport width. So 1 VW is going to be like 1% in width. Same with VH. Right? I don't think there's anything wrong with just trying out some of these, but I don't want you to like even right now at all kind of get overwhelmed at that. The thing is we're like a full stack boot camp. We're not focusing strictly on front end and styling. But if you do want to develop those skills, then yeah, like it's probably worth checking into these relative lengths a little bit. And my recommendation for how to get better and better and better at this is pick a web page, like YouTube, Wikipedia, Facebook, whatever. Pick a website, take a screenshot of it at different widths, and then take yourself through the process of just building that up without looking at their code. Right? That's why I recommend like take some screenshots and then you just look at it and you build it. You don't need to build it in like the highest fidelity, right? But just in little bits. That's a really good way to just kind of practice for yourself. And in fact, Honestly, that might be something that we'll try out in a minute. We can just pick a web page, and we can just start building it in little chunks and see where we get. So I wanted to, are there other questions at the moment, actually? I wanted to introduce you to one more thing. This kind of ties us back to the conversation that we were having very early on in the lecture, where I said, there's SQL, there's CSS. These are languages that exist for particular things. So SQL is a language that's very good for pulling stuff from databases. It's not perfect. There's still things that you can do to make it a little bit better. So some people install some plugins to SQL, right, to extend the SQL language. Same with CSS. CSS is very good at applying styles to elements on the DOM. It's not perfect, but it's very good at it. Some people might find some issues with it. One of them being, I might want to write some nice conditions. Maybe not just conditions for media queries, but just other kinds of conditions. If this was a couple years ago, one of the things I would have said was, I want to be able to have variables, or I want to be able to do math a lot better in CSS. Recently, CSS has included variables and better support for math, but years ago, that would have been a thing. Or another thing that I might do in CSS is, I hate this. I hate it. Yarr, I hate it, right? Because these are all styles that are supposed to be applied to the same kind of div. I would like to be able to write something like, OK, so for a div, right, maybe I should have put a class name or something for these divs, but I would like to be able to say, for these, if that particular div, if it is a big div, then here's what you should do. Right? If it is a medium div, then here's what you should do. And I'd like to be able to just have that all nested together. And it feels dumb to me that CSS doesn't do that. Right? This is a poorly completed homework assignment. Someone's just handed in, oh, here's CSS. I'm like, you're missing most of the things I asked for. So some people really couldn't stand it, and they came up with an extension to CSS, or a layer on top of it. And actually, multiple people did this kind of thing. One of them is called Sass. Right? So Sass, I'll bring that up. Syntactically awesome style sheets. This isn't the only extension to CSS, but it's one of them. I like the glasses. They're very sassy. Oh, I never noticed the little semicolon. That's funny. There's also less, right? Leaner style sheets. Right? So there's less. There's another one called stylus. Stylus for CSS. They gotta get better SEO. So here's CSS, expressive, dynamic, robust CSS with stylus. And these people are like, CSS needs a hero. Look at how trash this code is, or whatever, right? So for stylus is like, yo, what if? Imagine a world where we didn't need curly braces. That's not even really been a thing that I've been angry about, but as soon as someone's like, yeah, what if we don't need curly braces? I'm like, yeah, what if we don't need curly braces, right? What if we didn't need semicolons? Like, yeah, what semicolons ever do for me, right? And then they're like, what about transparent mixins? And I'm like, yeah, you lost me. I don't understand what that means. But in some way, right, they're making changes to CSS to maybe make it a little cleaner to read, right? Whatever mixins are, they might introduce some extra functionality. We'll look at that in a second. And less kind of does the same thing. They're like, oh, it's CSS with just a little more. I don't like less. I've never actually worked with less, but I don't like its vibe. I just don't like it. If less was a person, I'd be like, yeah, don't stand so close to me. I like Sass a lot. So Sass is going to be CSS with superpowers, right? So there's ways of installing Sass. As soon as you click install Sass, you might feel a little overwhelmed. What's this mouse in here for? Keyboard? I'm just I'm hyperventilating now. Code kit? Paid? I don't want to pay for my CSS. What? Hammer? Why are there so many options? So CSS is essentially a language that you can write, or let me rephrase that. Sass is a language that you write that can turn into CSS. So you write in this like nicer language, and then you let a machine do the job of translating that nice code into ugly CSS. And you're like, I don't even want to look at the CSS. Like, I will write Sass, and I will just trust that it works. Right? So for those of you who maybe have heard of like TypeScript, there's a similar idea with JavaScript. There are some people, for example, me. I hate JavaScript. It's a terrible language. JavaScript is fine, but there's sometimes when like I get frustrated with it. TypeScript says, hey, you can write in TypeScript, and then we will translate that over to JavaScript for you. You never have to look at JavaScript, right? And I go, oh, thank you, thank you. That's basically the idea. Now, I don't want to like sour JavaScript too much for you right now, so just continue working with it. And then when you get some time, like Google TypeScript, and you'll see what's going on with it. But right now, we're going to talk about Sass. What this means is we write in a language, and then we need a machine. We need a machine to translate that code. Right? So before I even show you what Sass is like, I just want you to understand that idea, is that like I need a machine that takes in a text file and makes another text file. Right? Often, that's going to be called a preprocessor. It's called a preprocessor because it processes your code before it's getting used. Right? So it makes your CSS before you need it, if we want to think about it that way. So what I'm going to have to do is, in one way or another, install a program to do that. I can either buy a program, which why would I do that? Like I don't know why anyone would pay for this. And also these are like GUI programs. Like they have like an interface, and you like click on them, and you say, oh, these documents here are Sass, and then you click generate, and they make CSS for you. Or since we're hackers now, you can install the command line tools. So there's an actual command line Sass program that you can go Sass this file, turn it into a CSS file. That's one thing. You can go npm install -g Sass to get it. Or if you have Chocolatey on Windows, you can go Choco install. Maybe you're on Mac, you can go brew. There's a whole bunch of different ways. I'm going to do it a whole different way. What I'm going to do is, in this demo here, Sass demo, what time is it? 20 minutes. So Sass demo, I'm going to start off by like npm initting. So I'm going to make a node project, npm init -y. Right? Once I've made my node project, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to install the Node Sass middleware. Right? So let me not write this code yet. Let me show you the docs. So there is this thing called Node Sass middleware. Last week, you played around with Express. Right? Express is pretty cool. One of the nice things about Express is that it lets you bring in plugins. You used middleware for Vue stuff. There is also middleware for doing things like processing Sass. So I'm going to set up a little Express project, and all it's going to do is it's going to have one page that I get to look at. But the CSS for that page is going to be written in Sass. And so I want us to see that what it's going to involve as we build it, what it's going to involve is it's going to involve installing the Node Sass middleware. Right? And then I'm going to have an Express project that brings in the Sass middleware. And somehow, I know this configuration here looks super messy. Somehow I'm going to connect the Node Sass middleware to watch certain files and compile them when it needs to, or like do the processing when it needs to. So I'm going to start off by just npm install Node Sass middleware. That's what I'm going to do to start with. Right? And this might take a second, might not. What I'm also going to do in the meantime is I'm going to make myself a file. This one's going to be called server.js. I want you to know that this isn't the only way to install Sass at all. Right? It's not the only way. And it's also, I think you have instructions in Twitter for like stretch Sass. They might show you how to do Sass in a different way. And, that's totally fine. I'm showing you my way of doing it in this particular scenario. So I'm making myself a server. I'm I'm going to set up a very basic Express server. I have a little shortcut to do it. Boop. So my basic Express server brings in Express, makes the app, picks a port, and then I should be able to like node server JS and like, oh, I forgot to install Express in the first place. So npm install Express. So like I should be able to like run my server and be able to see when I go to slash the words hello world. So we'll go node server. Nice. I'm already running a server on 3000, so let me just stop that real quick. All right, so node server, third time's the charm. Localhost 3000. When I go to it, what I get is a page that says hello world. What I want to do is I want to be able to do things like go slash and then something.html. Right? I don't want to work with EJS today. I'm just going to have like HTML pages. At the moment, I don't have a file called dfgh.html, or let's say we call this page.html. It doesn't exist. So I could go ahead and I could like make that file. For example, here I could go new file, page.html. Right? And maybe I'll throw some text in there, hello. Right? This is still not going to work. It doesn't work. The thing that I'm going to have to do is I want to actually serve this page. Right? I want to serve this page. I'm going to do something called serving static assets. Right? This is not necessarily something that you've done at all so far. I'm not going to like explain every step of it for you, but what I am going to do is give you a link to the small snippet of code and the example that shows you how this works. Serving static assets Express. What this means is anytime you're trying to serve something like a file or an image, like if somebody's supposed to be able to go to slash user.jpg on your server, we need a route for that. We need a route. It doesn't make sense for us to create a route for every single one of the images that our application has. It just doesn't make any sense. Because if I have 100 images, I shouldn't make app.get image1.jpg does this, and app.get image2.jpg does this. Like that's a lot of work. So instead, what we're going to do is we get to say that my server has some, over here, static assets. Right? This line of code here generates routes for every file in the public folder. This means I've said express static public. If I had a folder called public, any file that I put in there is going to be available to the world. Any file that I put in there is going to be available. So right now, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make a folder called public. And I'm going to take that page.html and just drag it into public. So it's in there now. It's in here. And when I restart my server, what I'm going to find is if I go localhost 3000 page HTML right now, it will show me that particular page. It'll take me there. And I can put other files in there, like CSS files and stuff like that, and it'll work fine. Does that idea on its own make sense? Right? Or like why I would want to do that? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make myself a Sass file. So we're just going to go new file, style.sass. Right? And Sass files either have an extension that goes SASS or SCSS. Doesn't make a difference. I'm going to say SCSS. And then what I have to do is in my page HTML, like I want to be able to actually refer to the particular style. So let me do this. Let me go. Rel style sheet is going to go to maybe style.scss. I could try that. But the thing is, an SCSS file is not a CSS file. So my browser is not going to be able to like actually use that for styling. Instead, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to point it to, is there Sass? I'm going to have to point it to a hypothetical file that doesn't exist right now. A file that I'm going to say is going to be called style.css. And when I look over at my stuff, I don't have a style.css. I have a style.scss. At the moment when I go ahead and I test this, whoops. When I go ahead and I test it, there's no rules that are being applied to the thing. But what I want to get to is I want to get to a place where I can say h1 is green, color green, and I just want to make sure that this works. And as soon as this works, then I'm going to start bringing in some funky Sass stuff. Right? So Sass is, you can just write normal CSS, or you can write weird stuff. So I would like this to turn green in a sec. What I have to do now is actually connect the Node Sass middleware. And the way that I'm going to do that, boop, and boop. The way that I'm going to do that is I have to actually bring in the like Node Sass middleware from my Node modules. And then once I've done that, then I'll have to also go app.use with the Sass middleware. And we'll look at this stuff in a second here. I just needed to paste it in for myself. But const Sass middleware equals, and then require Node Sass middleware. I am getting my current like directory so that I know what folder I'm in. Because what I'm going to tell Sass to do is I'm going to tell it, look at all the files in this directory. Okay, look at the files in the directory that you're currently in. And then your destination is going to be the same place. And what I want you to do is every time that somebody needs a particular CSS file, right, you're going to go look at the Sass. You're going to generate the CSS for it. And we're going to have that CSS ready for them. And if for some reason the CSS and the Sass don't match, then you're going to generate a new CSS file so that I get to keep editing the Sass file and the CSS gets generated for me. Okay. Now, we're going to see, hopefully this works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. At the moment, I have this style.scss. I'm going to refresh this right now. It didn't work. Oh, no. Ah! It didn't work. And luckily, though, among the configuration that I'd put in, I had said debug true. What debug true means is that it's going to actually print out some errors in my console. And I'll see that Express, when it's running, it's actually doing stuff. It's saying, OK, well, it's trying to find from this page here, from sassdemo/style.scss, then it needs to write it into style.css in that same folder. I don't have that, right? Like in here, style.css is not inside of Sass demo. It's inside of public style.scss. So something that I might want to do is I could start playing around with how am I referring to this thing. Like maybe I have to go public/style.scss. I don't know. We'll just mess around with it. That seems like it worked. And so maybe the place that I had to actually refer to needed to be /public. That kind of frustrates me though, because I think that if I go /style.css, like that's working, and /style.scss, like that's working as well. /public/style.scss, like that doesn't work. And neither does that. So I just get a little frustrated. In this case here, I'm not going to show you exactly how to figure out this particular issue, because this is going to be unique to the Node Sass middleware thing, which you may or may not use. Right? But I want you to see that there's places where like there's little things that are maybe slightly broken, and not necessarily broken in the thing, but broken in my understanding of it. Right? So if I had more time, what I would do is I would make my way over to the Node SaaS middleware, and I would actually dive into the documentation and learn a bit more about how to actually use it. And what I'm going to do for the moment is I'm just going to leave it as this so that it works. And I want to show you what a project with a lot of SaaS that has been written looks like. So let me stop this server. I'll be giving you the code for that one. And I'm also going to start a different one. I'll show you what it looks like, and then I'll show you the code. So this is a project running on localhost 3000. If I go, wow, so pretty. Ooh. And it does something very similar to what we built in the first half, which is when I get close, then it puts itself into like a column style thing. It's not as nice, but it still kind of does the job. But in here, I have SaaS. And I want to show you what that SaaS looks like. So this is the Express server. So it looks pretty much identical to what we just built. And I'll give you the code for this one as well. But the part that's important is in the way that I've set this one up, all my stuff is there's a public file, index.html, and then there's a styles in which I've put individual styles for individual pages, right? And not just individual pages, but also individual parts of pages. And that's something that's going to be kind of interesting. I will, in the next 5 minutes, give you a breakneck kind of run through of some of the things that are in Sass. It's going to be breakneck speed. And the reason this is going to be fast is because there actually isn't a lot to Sass. Right? Here's the first thing. This is the first thing in my main CSS or main Sass file. What do you notice? Variables, yes. Variables. So point 1 for CSS for Sass, we got variables. What is this? Please, someone let me out of my cage. What does this do? What do you think it might do? It might import. Oh, thanks. OK. We can import from other files, right? So maybe this main file, it also imports from a header file. Okay? Something kind of funky. Import. I write the word, but when I make the file, I have to put an underscore with it. Okay? That's just a convention that Sass has picked. So just the same way that you had your partials in EJS, you can have partials for styling in Sass. Here's another thing. Nested stuff. Oh, I just saw your eyes get real wide. This is nice. Look at that. If Sass was this alone, then I would be sold. Just nesting, absolutely. Right? That's all. Right? Nesting. Media queries are still the same thing. And now I just want to show you, did I do anything funky in the header? I think the other thing that I haven't pointed out yet is when you make variables, right? So this is color 1, color 2, whatever. I make my variables. I can use those variables anywhere. I go $color2, right? So if I wanted to change a bunch of colors, I could change them all in the same place. Can you use variables for things other than colors, like sizes? Yeah, why not? Paddings? Yeah, go for it. Go wild. So you might want to make a file where you keep all your variables, and then when you want to like white label your product, right, or put themes or whatever, you just switch out those variables for something else. Right? So Sass is pretty cool. That's honestly, that's about it. Like I go ahead and I change one of these, red. Right? When I go in and refresh this page, everywhere where it was using that color 1 is now red. Right? Do I have to sell it more than this? Like, is that good? That's it. There is one like slight kind of thing that you might want to look at. The Sass page here, I think on Learn Sass, they do a really good job of kind of like laying out all the main things. Like you can go deep into using Sass properly, but under Learn Sass, they've broken it down. There's this idea of pre-processing, which I've talked about a bit. Variables. They're variables. Nesting is nesting. I don't know what you want. Partials. Yeah, so there's this idea of partials. Modules and partials are sort of similar. A partial is when I write some CSS that I want to include in another CSS in another SAS file. Module is going to essentially allow me to do the same thing, which is like break stuff up into little compartments and just kind of join it together. But the real kind of interesting things are these two here. Mixins. So mixins let you create functions. You can think of mixins as basically functions for CSS. So in this case here, I've made a thing that, or not I, like in this case here, the, whoops, no, where'd you go? Mixin. In this case here, what the code says is there's a mixin called transform, because whenever you want to make transformations in CSS, you often have to do it this way, meaning you have to write the same thing over and over and over again 3 times, because you have to write it such that it works with regular CSS, such that it works with Safari, such that it works with Internet Explorer, right? And that's just annoying. So instead, this person here who wrote the documentation said, I'll make a function that generates all 3 of them, right? And that way, you just get to write a little bit less. Right? So a little function, you can go transform, rotate. So I'd like you to, if you want, take a look at that. But then there's also, where are you at? Where are you at? The idea of the nesting. I want to show you the documentation for nesting. Nested rows. There we go. For nesting, you can nest things that are like immediately inside of each other and all that, but in the same way that CSS has like the plus and the angle bracket and the little tilde and all that, you can continue using that stuff in here. Right? So I just want you to know that. Like, if I wanted h2 and also h2 plus p, that allows me to hit that. And there was a particular, maybe not. There's one particular kind of funky bit of SAS that I wanted to show you, but I think I might just write it in Slack for you and just kind of let you explore it. Right? I hope it goes without saying that all that flexbox stuff that I was doing works in SAS. Right? SAS is really just CSS, but you can write cooler things. And if I really wanted to see what gets generated by this main SCSS, with its import and with its nesting and all that, I could go see it. Main.css ends up looking like usual CSS, right? Except things got split up wherever they needed to. So in one place I had chunk with aside and article inside, but here it's split them. There's no mention of variables anywhere. One thing that I do find kind of neat is it keeps comments, which is cool. Neat. Play around with it. It's 12:02. I feel like letting you go. Are there questions? Make pretty pictures. I don't know. Like, look at some pretty pictures and make them, and then you'll get good with CSS. But if I really do have to leave you with one thing, is take a look at Flexbox, right? Like, Flexbox is definitely worth your time. Right? And also, be very mindful about the CSS that you're writing. Right? Write one line at a time and see what it does. Take it out. Add it in. Take it out. Add it in. And just really get to know each individual line of CSS. Because at the end of the day, you should be able to do like really, really cool things, layout-wise, with little bits of stuff. That's it. Have a great rest of the day, and enjoy finishing between today and tomorrow Tweeter. Yeah, enjoy. Bye, Calgary. Oh, thank you. Oh, so nice.